A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and the scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. And from the 13th chapter, just at the beginning. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." For the wisdom contained in these holy words, we give thanks. Amen.
Have compassion for everyone you meet, even if they don't want it. What seems conceit, bad manners, or cynicism is always a sign of things no ears have heard, no eyes have seen. You don't know what wars are going on down where the spirit meets the bone. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. A den of robbers. When Jesus entered the temple on the day after, he marched into Jerusalem with a crowd of people swinging palm branches as the Roman army entered from another gate. When Jesus entered the temple on the day after that, it was a continuation of a statement against the oppressive rule of Rome. And when he entered the temple, Mark tells us, Jesus began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations', but you have made it a den of robbers." These verses in Mark are familiar to us. Many of us think this was a religious act that Jesus was undertaking. Jesus was angry that there was business going on in the temple. He was upset that worship had been commercialized, making money instead of worshiping. If we stay here in that interpretation, though, we miss the point I think Jesus was trying to make. Let's dig a wee bit deeper. The temple, you see, was more than a place of worship. Dr. Aubrey Hendricks tells us it was the governing institution of Israel, the center of political life and power. The temple housed the supreme Jewish legislative and judicial court, known as the Sanhedrin. It was here that those in power represented Roman interests to the Jewish people. They were the liaisons collecting taxes for Rome and otherwise instituting direction from the empire. The temple was also the center of Israel's economy. The central bank was housed there and held great wealth. So why did Jesus walk in that day, the second day of organized action? Why did he turn over tables and cry out against the merchants? Why did he, along with a group of people, put a stop to commercial operations for at least a short time? Well, let's start with Jesus turning over the tables and calling out the temple as a den of robbers, a safe place for thieves. With this statement, the prophet Jeremiah is brought into the picture, and all the religious leaders would have known what Jesus was saying with that one phrase, den of robbers. Here is what Jesus was pointing to. The word came to Jeremiah from the Holy One. Stand in the gate of the Holy One's house and proclaim there this word and say, hear the word of the Holy One, all you people of Judah, you that enter these gates to worship the Holy One. Thus says the Holy One of hosts, the God of Israel, amend your ways and your doings, and let me dwell with you in this place. Do not trust these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Holy One. This is the temple of the Holy One. This is the temple of the Holy One. For if you truly amend your ways and your doings, if you truly act justly with one another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your ancestors forever and ever. Here you are, trusting in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name and say, we are safe, only to go on doing these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your sight? We know that God expected the care of the people most vulnerable and without standing. God expected that. People like those the prophets called the alien, who we would call the person living in this country who is undocumented. They were without standing. People like the widow, women who had lost their spouse and therefore had no power, and more often than not, no property or income. They were without standing. People like orphans, children, who were at the bottom of the societal ladder in the best of circumstances. Without the support and protection of parents, their well-being became even more precarious. They were without standing. God called on the leaders to care for the people without standing, the people most vulnerable in the community. And Jeremiah, speaking on God's behalf, called out the leaders of the temple for abusing their power, for ignoring God's direction, and then having the audacity to stand in God's house and say everything was okay. We are safe. So, why would Jesus feel the need to not only call out the Roman Empire the day before, as he and a large crowd of people marched into Jerusalem, and then on the next day, call out the religious authorities in the temple in the same way Jeremiah did? The simple answer is there was a parallel. The religious leaders in Jesus' time were doing the same thing as the religious leaders were doing at the time Jeremiah lived. Dr. Hendricks tells us that the temple obligation sacrifices for poor people were a hardship. Simeon, the rabbi Paul called his teacher, was concerned that the price for sacrificial doves was unreasonably inflated, for example. Doves were the sacrifice used by the poorest of the people. To give you some context, Mary and Joseph purchased 2 doves for sacrifice when they presented Jesus in the temple. This elevated price had potential of keeping people away from the temple altogether because folks were ashamed that they did not have enough money to purchase a dove for sacrifice. If they did not come, imagine what would happen. There would be no offering at all. If that happened, the temple revenues would be significantly diminished, even without the sale of doves. The solution was to drop the price by 99%. Think about that, 99%. The price could be dropped by 99% and the merchants would still make a profit. Price jacking is as old as time. Priests received a percentage of every temple sacrifice and offering. They also received income from taxes levied for them, payment for a firstborn, part of every animal slaughtered, and a portion of the proceeds from sheep shearing. They took in payment after a transgression for a person's redemption. They loaned money and foreclosed on land put up for collateral when the loan could not be paid. This expectation to give to the temple caused great hardship for many people. One day, soon after Jesus turned over the tables, Jesus went back to the temple. He was teaching, and he warned the people listening to the religious leaders, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. Don't we just hate that? They will receive the greater condemnation. And then, standing right outside the treasury, Jesus watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then Jesus called his disciples and said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. Now, I'm just going to tell you, these verses are not a testimony for a stewardship campaign. These verses are a condemnation of the religious authorities taking advantage of, stripping everything from people without standing, the most vulnerable people in the community. This is why Jesus started to turn over the tables and for a moment in time stopped all commercial activity in the temple. Jesus said the temple would be destroyed, said not one stone would be left upon another, said the people could move this mountain into the sea. God was not in the temple, not in the place called by God's name. God, Jesus said, was within the people. They were God's beloved and precious children. And for all these actions, the religious leaders conspired against Jesus to destroy him, to kill him. This scripture is not about bringing spirituality back into the worship space. It is about bringing God's dream for shalom, peace, comprehensive well-being into life, making it reality. It seems fitting on this day, on this long weekend where we celebrate Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that I use his words here, for they are another parallel to Jeremiah and Jesus. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington, originally called the March for Jobs and Justice, it echoes Jeremiah and Jesus. Here's his words. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. And in these words and with this crowd of people, Martin Luther King Jr. and all the leaders closed down business in Washington, just like Jesus. These are words for us to hear today. Alongside Jeremiah and Jesus, they are a call on our lives to hold fast and work toward God's dream. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. We must stand resolute. For, let me remind you, we are not only celebrating Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this long weekend, we are also installing a new president. Those close to him are proclaiming hopes and dreams for this country, hopes rooted in a document called Project 2025. Dreams focus on the well-being of a few at the expense of a multitude. So you see, we simply cannot remain silent when the lives of the people in this country, people vulnerable without standing, feel an even heavier boot on their neck and fear in their heart. We cannot wait to lift our voice and move our feet. We might feel frustrated and disheartened. It might seem like an uphill battle. We might not see the end of this journey toward shalom, peace, comprehensive well-being in our lifetime. I expect many of us won't. No matter, we cannot stop. We cannot stop the work God calls us to do. So, let's get out there, turn over some tables. The peaceful valley, just over the mountain. The peaceful valley, few come to know. We may never get there, ever in this lifetime, but sooner or later, it's there we will go. Sooner or later, it's there